I'm sitting here in my living room 3 years later, and I still remember every single word that came out of my mother-in-law's mouth when she first laid eyes on my newborn son. She looked at this perfect little human being that I had just spent 18 hours bringing into the world, and the first thing she said wasn't congratulations. It wasn't how beautiful he was. It wasn't even asking if he was healthy. She looked at my baby and said, "I don't do ugly babies." Those 5 words changed everything. Not just my marriage, not just my relationship with my husband's family, but my entire life. Because what happened next in that hospital room was something none of them saw coming, and it's something I've never regretted for a single second. Let me tell you about the people who were supposed to be my family. My husband, Davin Thornwick, a 31-year-old insurance adjuster who I thought I knew after 3 years of marriage. The man who held my hand when I said yes to his proposal, who promised to love and protect our family no matter what. Then there's his mother, Vivenna Thornwick, 55 years old, retired bank manager, and the kind of woman who believes her opinion is the only one that matters in any room she enters. And then there's my son, baby Kale. 3 years old now, but back then just minutes old, still covered in the evidence of his difficult journey into this world. The most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life. Even though I was exhausted, even though every muscle in my body ached, even though I had just been through the most intense experience a woman can go through. I'm a pediatric nurse. I've seen thousands of newborn babies. I know what they look like when they first arrive, all wrinkled and red and absolutely perfect in their imperfection. I know that every single one of them is a miracle, regardless of who they look like or what features they inherit from which side of the family. But apparently, my mother-in-law had different standards. You see, I'm half Latina, half Irish. My features are a blend of both sides of my heritage, and I've always been proud of that. My late mother used to tell me I had the best of both worlds written right there on my face. But to Vivenna, my features weren't something to celebrate. They were something she hoped wouldn't show up in her grandchild. She had spent my entire pregnancy dropping little hints about hoping the baby would look like Davin's side. Comments about how strong the Thornwick genes were, how all the men in their family had the same nose, the same jawline. She would show me photo after photo of Davin as a baby, pointing out every feature, talking about how she hoped those would be the features that came through. I thought it was just typical grandmother excitement. I thought she was just being hopeful that the baby would look like her son. I had no idea she was actually worried that the baby might look like me. When Kale was born, he was absolutely beautiful. He had Davin's nose, that distinctive Thornwick chin that Vivenna was so proud of. But he also had my eyes, my skin tone, the shape of my mouth. He was a perfect blend of both of us. Exactly what you'd expect from 2 people who love each other and decide to create a life together. But when Vivenna looked at him, all she saw was what she didn't want to see. "I don't do ugly babies," she said, and then she looked at me with this expression of pure disappointment. He looks like her side. I was holding my son, this perfect little human being who had just made me a mother, and the woman who was supposed to welcome him into the family with open arms had just called him ugly. She had just reduced this miracle, this tiny person who was part of her own son, to nothing more than a disappointment, because he didn't look exactly like what she had ordered. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was what my husband did next. Davin, the man who had promised to love and protect our family, looked at his own son and shrugged. Actually shrugged, like we were talking about a meal that hadn't turned out quite right. "Maybe we can try again," he said, as casually as if he was suggesting we order a different pizza. "With someone cuter." Those words hit me like a physical blow, not just because of what he said about our son, but because of what he implied about me. Someone cuter. As if the problem wasn't just that Kale looked like my side of the family, but that I wasn't good enough to create beautiful children with. I sat there in that hospital bed, holding my baby, and I realized that the 2 people who were supposed to love this child unconditionally had just rejected him before he was even an hour old. They had looked at this perfect little boy and found him lacking because he carried my heritage in his features. That's when I knew my marriage was over. That's when I knew I had to protect my son from these people who would spend his entire childhood making him feel like he wasn't good enough, like he was somehow a mistake, like he needed to apologize for looking like his mother. But what I did next shocked everyone in that room, including myself. Because sometimes, when people show you exactly who they are, you have to believe them. And sometimes, you have to act fast to protect the people you love from the people who are supposed to love them. What happened in the next 10 minutes changed everything. And I'm about to tell you exactly how I made sure that my son would never, ever have to hear those words again. To understand how devastating that moment in the hospital was, you need to know how much hope I had carried throughout my entire pregnancy. I need to take you back to the beginning to show you just how badly I wanted to belong to this family and how hard I tried to earn their love. When Davin and I first got married 3 years earlier, I thought I was gaining not just a husband but a whole new family. My own mother had passed away from cancer 2 years before our wedding, and my father had never been in the picture. I was essentially alone in the world, except for a few distant cousins I barely knew. So when Davin proposed, I wasn't just saying yes to him. I was saying yes to Sunday dinners with Vivenna, to holiday traditions, to having a mother figure in my life again. I was so naive. The red flags were there from the very beginning, but I chose to ignore them because I wanted so desperately for it to work. Vivenna had opinions about everything I did. The way I dressed was too casual for family gatherings. My cooking wasn't seasoned right. My career as a pediatric nurse was admirable, she would say with that fake smile, but not quite as prestigious as being a doctor or a lawyer. Every compliment came with a subtle dig. Every acceptance came with conditions. But the comments about my heritage were the ones that should have warned me about what was coming. She would make little jokes about how exotic I looked, always said with a laugh like it was supposed to be flattering. She would ask me to bring ethnic food to family gatherings, then spend the entire meal explaining to everyone what each dish was, like I was some kind of cultural ambassador, instead of just her daughter-in-law who happened to make good enchiladas. When other family members would comment on how beautiful I was, Vivenna would always redirect the conversation. "Oh yes, she's lovely," she would say, "but you should see the baby pictures of Davin. Such strong features. The Thornwick men have always been so handsome." I told myself she was just proud of her family. I told myself she would warm up to me eventually. I told myself that when we had children, everything would change because we would finally be connected by something deeper than marriage. The pregnancy was hard, both physically and emotionally. I had severe morning sickness for the first 5 months, and there were complications that required bed rest during my 3rd trimester. As a pediatric nurse, I was used to being on my feet for 12-hour shifts, taking care of other people's children, making their pain go away. Being confined to bed, unable to work, unable to feel useful, was torture. Davin wasn't much help during this time. He would come home from his insurance job, eat the dinner I had managed to prepare despite feeling nauseous, and then disappear into his home office to play video games or plan his next fishing trip with his buddies. When I asked him to come with me to doctor appointments, he would sigh like I was asking him to donate a kidney. "Can't you just tell me what the doctor says?" he would ask. "I've got this tournament this weekend, and the guys are counting on me." I should have seen then that he wasn't ready to be a father. I should have realized that a man who couldn't prioritize his pregnant wife's medical appointments wasn't going to prioritize his child's needs either. But I kept making excuses for him. He was nervous about becoming a dad. He was dealing with stress at work. He would step up when the baby arrived. Vivenna, meanwhile, became increasingly involved in planning for her grandchild. She had very specific ideas about everything from the nursery colors to the baby's name. She would show up at our house with bags of baby clothes, all in neutral colors because, as she put it, we don't know if it's going to be a boy or girl, but we know it's going to be a Thornwick. She would bring photo albums and spread them across our coffee table, pointing out family resemblances going back generations. "Look at this jawline," she would say, tracing her finger along a picture of Davin's great-grandfather. "It's been in the family for over 100 years. I can't wait to see if the baby gets it." She never once mentioned hoping the baby would inherit anything from my side of the family. During my baby shower, which Vivenna insisted on hosting, I watched her show my ultrasound pictures to her friends and relatives. "Doesn't the profile look just like Davin when he was in the womb?" she would say, holding up a side-by-side comparison she had somehow managed to create. I think we're going to have another little Thornwick on our hands." Every single conversation about my unborn child was about how much he or she would look like Davin's family. It was like my genetic contribution was just an unfortunate necessity, something to be minimized and hopefully overcome by superior Thornwick genes. I spent hours in that nursery, painting walls and arranging furniture, dreaming about the moment when I would bring my baby home to this perfect little room. I imagined Vivenna holding her grandchild for the first time, finally understanding that this little person was part of me too, and that my heritage was something to be celebrated, not hidden. I pictured family photos where my son or daughter would be surrounded by people who loved every part of them, including the parts that came from me. I imagined holidays where my child would hear stories about both sides of their family, where they would grow up knowing they were the beautiful result of two different cultures coming together. I was working extra shifts at the hospital right up until my bed rest began, saving every penny I could for baby supplies while Davin spent money on new fishing equipment and weekend trips with his friends. I wanted everything to be perfect for our child. I wanted to prove to his family that I could be a good mother, a good wife, a good addition to their family tree. Looking back now, I realize I was trying so hard to earn love that should have been given freely. I was working to deserve acceptance that should have been automatic. I was fighting for a place in a family that had already decided I didn't quite belong. But in that hospital bed, holding my newborn son, I still had hope. I still believed that once they saw this perfect little person we had created together, all the subtle criticisms and careful comments would disappear. I thought that love for a grandchild would be stronger than whatever reservations they had about me. I was so incredibly wrong. The labor started at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. I woke up to contractions that felt like someone was wrapping a steel band around my entire torso and tightening it until I couldn't breathe. After 9 months of preparing for this moment, after reading every book and taking every class, nothing had really prepared me for the reality of bringing a human being into the world. Davin was annoyed that I woke him up, actually annoyed, like I had somehow chosen the most inconvenient time possible to go into labor. He stumbled around our bedroom, complaining about how tired he was going to be at work the next day, while I was doubled over in pain trying to time contractions with the app on my phone. "Are you sure this is really it?" he asked, like I might be faking the worst pain I had ever experienced in my life. "Maybe it's just false labor. The baby isn't due for another week." I wanted to throw my phone at his head, but another contraction hit, and all I could do was breathe through it and count the seconds until it passed. When I told him we needed to go to the hospital, he actually asked if we could wait until after he took a shower. By the time we got to the hospital, I was in active labor and the nurses immediately got me settled into a delivery room. Davin called his mother from the hallway, and I could hear him through the door. "Yeah, Mom, it's happening. No, I don't know how long it's going to take. Yeah, you can come, but maybe wait a few hours. I'm tired." Vivenna arrived 3 hours later, dressed like she was attending a business meeting instead of the birth of her first grandchild. She had a designer handbag, perfectly styled hair, and an expression that suggested she was already inconvenienced by the entire process. "How much longer is this going to take?" she asked the nurse, like labor was a scheduled appointment that was running behind. "I have a lunch reservation at noon." I was in hour 6 of contractions at that point, exhausted and in more pain than I thought was humanly possible. Every time a contraction hit, I would grip the bed rails and try to remember the breathing techniques from our childbirth class. Davin was supposed to be my support system, my partner through this incredible and terrifying experience. Instead, he was sitting in the corner scrolling through his phone, occasionally looking up to ask if I needed anything, but not really waiting for an answer. When I asked him to hold my hand during contractions, he would put his phone down with a sigh, hold my hand for 30 seconds, then immediately go back to whatever game he was playing. Vivenna spent the entire time complaining. The chairs were uncomfortable, the room was too cold, the nurses were too loud. She kept checking her watch and making comments about how long everything was taking, like my body was personally inconveniencing her by not producing her grandchild on a more convenient timeline. "When I had Davin, I was only in labor for 4 hours. She announced to anyone who would listen. "I don't understand why this is taking so long. Maybe it's because she's not built for this." She said it like I wasn't even in the room, like I was just some vessel that was malfunctioning instead of a woman going through the most intense physical experience of her life. The nurse who was monitoring my vitals gave Vivenna a sharp look, but I was too focused on getting through each contraction to say anything. As the hours dragged on, Davin became increasingly impatient. He kept asking the doctor when this would be over, like there was some kind of express option he could pay for to speed up the process. When I reached the pushing stage and the pain became so intense that I started crying, he actually rolled his eyes. "Come on, Zara," he said. "Women do this every day. You're being dramatic." I wanted to scream at him that he could trade places with me anytime he wanted, but I was too focused on the overwhelming urge to push and the doctor's instructions to waste energy on his ignorance. The nurse who was coaching me through the pushing gave him a look that could have melted steel. Vivenna, meanwhile, was positioned as far away from the actual birth as possible, making disgusted faces every time the doctor gave updates on my progress. When the doctor announced that the baby was crowning, she actually said, "Oh dear, that's quite messy, isn't it?" The final hour of labor was the longest hour of my life. Every muscle in my body was screaming, I was drenched in sweat, and I felt like I was being torn apart from the inside. But I was also filled with this incredible anticipation because I was about to meet my son. Despite everything, despite Davin's lack of support and Vivenna's complaints, I was about to become a mother. When Kyle finally arrived, the relief was overwhelming. The pain stopped instantly, replaced by this rush of adrenaline and pure love that I had never experienced before. The doctor placed him on my chest, and he was perfect. Absolutely perfect. He had tiny fingers and toes, a head full of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes and looked at me, I felt like my heart was going to explode from how much I loved him. He was everything I had dreamed of and more. He was healthy and beautiful and mine. In that moment, holding my son for the first time, I thought everything we had been through to get to this point was worth it. The difficult pregnancy, the complications, the 18 hours of labor, Davin's absence, Vivenna's complaints, none of it mattered because we had created this perfect little human being together. I looked up at Davin, expecting to see the same wonder and love in his eyes that I was feeling. I expected him to be overwhelmed by meeting his son, to maybe even cry a little at the miracle we had just witnessed. Instead, he was looking at Kyle with this expression I couldn't quite read. Not love, not wonder, not pride. Something else. Something that made my stomach clench with anxiety. That's when Vivenna stepped closer to get her first real look at her grandchild. And that's when she said the words that changed everything. "I don't do ugly babies." The silence that followed Vivenna's words was deafening. I could hear the machines beeping around us, the distant sound of other families celebrating new arrivals down the hall. But in our room, everything had gone completely still. Even the nurses had stopped moving, frozen in shock at what they had just witnessed. I looked down at Cale in my arms, this perfect little boy who was maybe 20 minutes old, and I saw exactly what Vivenna and Davin were seeing. He had Davin's nose, that distinctive Thornwick chin that ran in the family, his father's ears. But he also had my eyes, my skin tone, the shape of my mouth. He was a beautiful blend of both of us, exactly what any normal grandparent would celebrate. But as I held him closer, I realized that, to them, the parts of him that looked like me weren't something to celebrate. They were flaws to be corrected. "Maybe we can try again," Davin had said, with someone cuter. The casual way he said it, like he was talking about returning a defective product, made something inside me snap. This wasn't just about their disappointment in how my son looked. This was about their fundamental rejection of who I was, and by extension, who my child was. I had spent 3 years trying to earn their acceptance. I had worked extra shifts to contribute more money to our household. I had learned to cook their family recipes. I had attended every holiday, every birthday party, every family gathering with a smile on my face, even when Vivenna made her little comments about my appearance, my career, my background. I had convinced myself that having a baby would finally make me a real part of their family. I thought that giving them a grandchild would earn me the love and respect I had been working so hard for. Instead, they were looking at my newborn son like he was a disappointment they would have to tolerate. "We need to call the family," Vivenna announced, already pulling out her phone. "Let them know the baby arrived safely." But the way she said it, with that tone of resignation, told me exactly what those phone calls were going to sound like. She wasn't calling to share joyful news about a beautiful new grandchild. She was calling to manage expectations, to prepare everyone for the fact that the baby didn't look quite right. Davin was already heading toward the door. "I'm going to call Dad and let him know," he said, not even looking back at me or his son. "This is going to be a long conversation." That's when I knew. I knew that my son was going to grow up hearing whispered conversations about how he didn't quite fit the family mold. I knew he was going to spend his childhood wondering why his grandmother never seemed as excited about him as she was about his cousins. I knew he was going to inherit all of my insecurities about not being good enough for the Thornwick family, except it would be worse for him because he would be stuck with them as his father and grandmother. I had grown up without a father, feeling like there was something missing in my life. But looking at Davin's reaction to his own son, I realized that sometimes having a bad father is worse than having no father at all. As they both left the room to make their phone calls, I was alone with Cale and the nurses who were still cleaning up from the delivery. One of them, a woman named Sarah who had been incredibly kind throughout my labor, came over to check on me. "Honey," she said quietly, "are you okay? Because what just happened in here was not okay." That's when I started crying, not from pain or exhaustion, but from the crushing realization that the family I had worked so hard to join would never truly accept my son. They would tolerate him, maybe even grow to love him in their own way, but there would always be conditions. There would always be the underlying message that he wasn't quite what they had hoped for. "Sarah," I said, my voice shaking, "I need you to bring me the birth certificate paperwork." She looked confused. "The paperwork? Is there something wrong with the information we have?" "I need to make some changes," I told her, my mind suddenly crystal clear despite everything I had just been through. Important changes. I had been carrying certain documents in my hospital bag for weeks, ever since my friend Melissa from nursing school had advised me to prepare for the worst-case scenario. Melissa was a family law attorney now, and when I had confided in her about some of Davin's behavior during my pregnancy, she had given me advice I hoped I would never need to use. "Just in case," she had said. "Just in case you need to protect yourself and your baby." I had thought she was being overly cautious. I had thought there was no way my marriage could deteriorate to the point where I would need legal protection from my own husband. But as I sat there holding my son, listening to Davin in the hallway telling his father that the baby doesn't really look like a Thornwick, I knew exactly what I had to do. While they were busy managing their disappointment with my son's appearance, I was going to make sure they never had the opportunity to make him feel inadequate again. I called Sarah back over and asked her to help me with the paperwork. I also asked her to bring me my phone. I had a recording app that I had started using weeks earlier, and I wanted to make sure I captured everything that happened next, because I had a feeling that when Davin and Vivenna came back into this room, they were going to say things that would help me protect my son for the rest of his life. 20 minutes later, Davin and Vivenna returned to the room, and I could tell from their expressions that their phone calls had gone exactly as I expected. They both looked like they had just finished damage control, like they had spent the time explaining to family members why they shouldn't get too excited about meeting the new baby. Davin walked in first, still holding his phone, shaking his head. "Well, that was awkward," he said to his mother, not even acknowledging that I was sitting right there. "Dad kept asking if the baby was healthy, and I didn't know how to explain that he's healthy. He just doesn't look like us." Vivenna nodded sympathetically. "I had the same problem with my sister. She was so excited to meet her new nephew, and I had to manage her expectations. I told her he's a sweet baby, but he definitely takes after his mother's side." They were talking about my son like he was a disappointment they had to collectively manage. Like his appearance was a family crisis that required careful handling and diplomatic explanations. I sat there holding Kyle, listening to them discuss how to minimize the impact of his existence on their family's image, and I felt my resolve strengthen with every word. "The good news," Davin continued, sitting down in the chair beside my bed without even asking how I was feeling, "is that babies change a lot in their first few months. Remember how different my cousin Jake looked when he was born versus when he was 6 months old? Maybe Kale will grow into his features. Maybe his skin will lighten up a bit, too, Vivenna added hopefully. Some babies get darker right after birth, but then lighten as they get older. That was the moment I knew I had made the right decision. They weren't just disappointed that Kale didn't look like them. They were hoping he would somehow become less like me as he grew older. They wanted him to evolve away from his own heritage, to minimize the parts of himself that connected him to his mother. I looked down at the birth certificate paperwork that was sitting on my bedside table, already filled out completely. Then I looked at the legal documents that were tucked underneath it, the ones that Melissa had helped me prepare weeks earlier when I started to suspect that my marriage might not survive the reality of parenthood. "Davin," I said, my voice steady and calm, "could you come here for a minute? I need you to look at something." He walked over, probably expecting me to show him some cute thing that Cole was doing, or maybe to ask for help with nursing. Instead, I handed him the birth certificate. He took it without really looking at it, but then his expression changed as he read what I had written. His face went completely white, then red, then white again. "What is this?" he said, his voice getting louder. "What did you do?" Vivenna rushed over to see what had upset him so much. When she saw the birth certificate, she actually gasped out loud. Under father, I had written unknown in clear, bold letters. Under mother, I had written my full name, Zara Solis. And under child's name, I had written Kyle Solis with no mention of the Thornwick name anywhere. "You can't do this," Davin said, his voice shaking with rage. "I'm his father. You can't just erase me from his birth certificate." "Actually," I said, reaching for the second set of documents, "I can." And I did. Here's why. I handed him the restraining order that I had filed the week before based on months of documented emotional abuse and neglect. Then I gave him the third document, which was a court order denying him any visitation rights or parental authority. "This is insane," Vivenna shrieked. "You can't keep a father away from his child. This is kidnapping. This is illegal." "No," I said, pulling out my phone and hitting the recording app that had been running since they walked back into the room. "This is protection. And everything you've said since you walked back into this room has been recorded, including the part where you hoped my son's skin would get lighter as he grows older." The room went completely silent. I could see both of them trying to remember exactly what they had said, trying to figure out how much of their conversation I had captured. "But that's not all," I continued, feeling calmer than I had in months. "I've been recording conversations with both of you for weeks. Every time you made comments about hoping the baby wouldn't look like me. Every time you talked about my heritage like it was something to be ashamed of. Every time you treated me like I wasn't good enough for this family." I played back a recording from the previous month where Vivenna had told her sister over the phone that she was worried the baby would be too ethnic looking, and how she hoped the Thornwick genes would be strong enough to balance things out. Davin's face had gone from red to gray. "Zara, you can't do this. I'm his father. I have rights." "You just told your own father that your son doesn't look like a Thornwick," I replied. "You agreed with your mother when she called him ugly. You suggested we try again with someone cuter. Those are your words, Davin, your recorded words." "But I didn't mean it like that," he stammered. "I was just upset. I was tired. People say things they don't mean when they're emotional." "People also show their true character when they think no one is paying attention," I said. "And your true character is someone who looks at his own newborn son and sees a disappointment that needs to be fixed or replaced." Vivenna had started crying, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage and frustration. "You planned this," she accused. "You've been planning this for months. You manipulated us." "I documented you," I corrected. "I recorded your actual words and actions. I didn't manipulate anything. I just made sure there was evidence of who you really are when you think you're safe to say what you really think." That's when Davin tried to grab Kyle from my arms, and that's when I pressed the call button for the nurses. Security arrived within minutes, and both Davin and Vivenna were escorted from the hospital while they screamed about their rights and threatened to call lawyers. But I wasn't worried about their threats. I had months of documentation, professional legal advice, and now a recording of them calling my newborn son ugly and hoping he would look less like his own mother as he grew older. I looked down at Kyle, who had slept peacefully through the entire confrontation, and I knew I had made the right choice. He would never have to grow up wondering why his grandmother didn't seem to love him as much as other grandchildren. He would never have to listen to his father make jokes about his appearance or heritage. He would grow up knowing that his mother loved him exactly as he was, and that sometimes protecting someone you love means making the hardest decision of your life. 3 years have passed since that day in the hospital, and I can honestly say that removing Davin and Vivenna from our lives was the best decision I ever made. Not just for me, but for Kale, who is now a happy, confident 3-year-old who has never once been made to feel like he isn't good enough exactly as he is. The legal battle that followed was intense, but short-lived. Davin hired a lawyer and tried to fight the court orders, but when his attorney heard the recordings of him calling his own newborn son ugly and suggesting we try again with someone cuter, even his legal representation seemed uncomfortable. The lawyer advised him to settle quietly rather than risk having those recordings played in open court. Vivenna attempted to claim grandparents' rights, which in our state requires proving that denying access would harm the child's well-being. When the family court judge heard the recordings of her hoping my son's skin would lighten and her comments about not doing ugly babies, the case was dismissed immediately. The judge actually commended me for protecting my child from what she called clearly documented emotional abuse. The most satisfying part of the legal proceedings was watching Davin's own family turn against him when they learned what he had said about Kyle. His father, who I had always thought was cut from the same cloth as Vivenna, was apparently horrified when he heard the recordings. Davin's sister called me personally to apologize and to tell me that she was ashamed of her brother's behavior. "What you did took incredible courage," she told me, "and you were right to protect Kale from that kind of toxicity. No child should ever have to hear their own father say those things about them." The extended family fallout was swift and brutal for both Davin and Vivenna. Family gatherings became awkward affairs where people whispered about what they had done. Several family members reached out to me directly, offering support and expressing their disgust at how Kyle had been treated. Some even asked if they could maintain relationships with both of us, but I politely declined. I didn't want any connection to that family, even through well-meaning relatives. Davin's attempts to contact us continued for about 6 months after the hospital incident. He would send text messages claiming he had changed, that he understood now how wrong he had been, that he wanted to be a father to his son. But his messages always included phrases like, "I know I messed up, and you have to understand that I was stressed, and maybe we can work something out." There was never a genuine apology. There was never an acknowledgement that calling his newborn son ugly was unforgivable. There was never any indication that he understood the deep psychological damage he could have caused if I hadn't protected Kyle from him. After 6 months of blocked calls and returned letters, he finally gave up and moved to another state. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he eventually married someone else, someone who apparently met his family's standards for appearance and background. I genuinely hope he learned from what happened with us and treats his new family better, but I'm grateful that's no longer my concern. My career as a pediatric nurse flourished once I was free from the constant stress and criticism of trying to maintain a toxic marriage. Without Davin's subtle undermining and Vivenna's passive-aggressive comments about my job not being prestigious enough, I was able to focus entirely on my work and my son. Within a year, I was promoted to charge nurse, and I now lead a team of incredible healthcare professionals who save children's lives every day. The financial freedom that came with not having to support Davin's expensive hobbies and Vivenna's gift expectations meant that Kale and I could afford a beautiful little house with a backyard where he could play safely. We have our own traditions now, our own holiday celebrations, our own definition of what family means. Kale is thriving in ways I never could have imagined. He's confident, curious, and incredibly smart. He speaks both English and Spanish fluently because I've made sure he knows about both sides of his heritage. He knows stories about his maternal grandmother, my mother, who would have absolutely adored him. He knows about his Irish great-grandparents and his Mexican great-grandparents, and he's proud of the rich cultural background that makes him who he is. Most importantly, he has never once been made to feel like his appearance is anything other than perfect. When people meet us, they often comment on how beautiful he is, how lucky I am to have such a gorgeous child. And he is beautiful, with his father's strong jawline and his mother's expressive eyes, with skin that reflects his mixed heritage and hair that catches the light just right. But even if he weren't conventionally beautiful, even if he had been born with physical challenges or differences, he would still be perfect to me. Because that's what real love looks like. That's what unconditional acceptance means. That's what family is supposed to be. Last week, Cale drew a picture of our family for his preschool class. It shows the two of us standing in front of our house, both of us smiling, both of us holding hands. When his teacher asked him to tell the class about his family, he said, "It's just me and my mom, and we're perfect together." And we are perfect together. We're not missing anything. We're not incomplete. We're not a broken family that needs to be fixed. We're exactly what we're supposed to be. People sometimes ask me if I regret what I did, if I ever worry that I was too harsh, if I think Cale might want to know his father when he gets older. The answer is always the same. I have never regretted protecting my child from people who would make him feel inadequate. I have never questioned the decision to choose his emotional well-being over maintaining family relationships that were built on conditions and criticism. If Kyle ever wants to reach out to his biological father when he's an adult, that will be his choice to make. But he'll make that choice from a position of strength and self-confidence, knowing that he is worthy of unconditional love, knowing that his heritage is something to be celebrated, not hidden. The birth certificate that I filled out in that hospital room 3 years ago wasn't just a legal document. It was a declaration that my son would grow up knowing he was wanted, valued, and loved exactly as he is. It was my promise to him that he would never have to earn acceptance from the people who were supposed to love him most. Sometimes protecting the people you love means making the hardest decision of your life. Sometimes it means walking away from family. Sometimes it means starting over completely. But when I look at my happy, confident son, when I see him playing in our backyard without a care in the world, when I hear him laugh at his own jokes and tell me about his dreams for the future, I know that every difficult moment was worth it. That birth certificate changed everything, just like I knew it would. It gave us both the chance to build a life based on love, acceptance, and genuine family bonds. And 3 years later, I can honestly say we've never been happier. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to make a difficult decision to protect someone you love, please share this video with others who might need to hear it. Leave a comment below telling me about your own experiences with choosing love over obligation, with protecting your children from toxic family dynamics, or with standing up for what's right even when it's hard. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories about real people making brave choices in impossible situations. Your support means everything, and sharing these stories helps other people know they're not alone in their struggles.